In 1879, a group of elite scientists and medical professionals in the city of Hinamizawa, Japan, studied the effects of various psychological torture methods upon children who were willingly entered into the program by their guardians. Extreme widespread poverty made such volunteers plentiful due to the promise of a slight government compensation. Within the first weeks of the program, however, mass suicides and unexplained tragedies resulted in widespread panic and unwanted investigations, leading to the cease of all further tests and the disbandment of the program. The studies have since been covered up, buried, forgotten. One study, however, was recently rediscovered. Several notebooks pertaining to a study code named the Hinamizawa Child Experiment were found in an old wooden box which looked as though it had barely avoided being torched. The notebooks inside, although pages were occasionally missing and blotted out, allowed for most of the study to be pieced together. Apparently, the Hinamizawa Child Experiment went something like this. Children of group 581 were strapped to chairs, each in a separate large warehouse. The child would be in the exact center of the completely vacant, windowless warehouse, lit by a singular lamp directly above their chair. The light would be dim and weak, barely illuminating a small area around the chair against the darkness of the warehouse. And it would flicker, on and off, on and off, sometimes staying on for a full minute and sometimes staying off for just as long. Every child had their torsos and heads strapped down while their arms remained free, and they were hooked up to an IV to deliver necessary nutrients. Their bathroom would simply be a bucket under their chair, accessible through a hole in the seat. Of the 4 children studied, only 2 were told what would be happening in the experiment, subjects 1 and 2. The other 2, subjects 3 and 4, were told nothing, and nothing would be done to them in order to act as a control. They would simply sit in an empty warehouse for several days. For the subjects told of and acted upon in the experiment, they were told very little, only that something or someone was in the room with them. It would start in one of the corners of the warehouse, but it would get closer, very slowly, possibly taking several days to reach the child. They were told, however, that when it finally reached them, it would hurt them, torture them. Upon being told this, Subject 1, the first to be informed, yanked the IV needle from his arm and proceeded to stab his own throat with it repeatedly. The scientist tried to restrain him, but his windpipe filled with blood and collapsed before anything could be done. Seconds later, Subject 1 was dead. Modifications to the experiment were made before informing Subject 2 and the newly recruited Subject 5 as a replacement for 1 about any of what they would be experiencing. Now, only the arm with the IV in it would be free, with the other strapped down. This would allow for bowel movements to be performed while making a similar suicide impossible. With the modifications in play, Subject 2 and 5 were informed of the experiment, while the other 2 were told nothing, and nothing would be in the room with them. All 4 would be monitored regularly by looking through small portholes in the ceiling of the warehouse. These are the notes taken by one of the observing scientists. Day 0. Time, 5 minutes, 54 seconds into experiment. Distance from subject, 231 feet. Subject 2 appears anxious and is frantically attempting to move his head, presumably trying to locate the thing in the warehouse. It is far too dark in the perimeter, however. Minimum distance for identification is 178 feet. Subject 5 has eyes shut tightly with clenched fists and seems to be muttering a phrase over and over. The la, or perhaps tele. Subject seems to be taking steps so as to not see the thing nor admit to its presence. Control group. Subject 3 seems bored and is humming to himself. Subject 4 appears to be asleep. Day 1. Time, 27 hours, 36 minutes into experiment. Distance from subject, 205 feet. Subject 2 goes to the bathroom. Day 1. Time, 27 hours, 46 minutes into experiment. Distance from subject, 199 feet. Subject 5 appears to have fallen asleep. Control. Subject 3 appears to be whistling to himself, swinging his legs back and forth. Subject 4 goes to the bathroom. Day 1. Time, 38 hours, 12 minutes into experiment. Distance from subject, 180 feet. Subject 2. Labored breathing is present and the subject is fighting the restraints and looking off into the distance. Subject 5 has again closed eyes tightly and is trying to face away from something. Mumbling a phrase has developed into clear, repeated speech. Actual translation appears to be, they lied, they lied. Control. Subject 3 is asleep. Subject 4 looks anxious for some reason, seems to be breathing heavy. Day 2. Time, 47 hours, 27 minutes into experiment. Distance from subject, 160 feet. Subject 2. Thing is now barely visible in the distance. Subject 5. Thing is now barely visible in the distance. Control. Subject 3. Something appears to be visible in the distance. Possible error, as a warehouse should be empty. Subject 4. A form similar to that present in Subject 3's warehouse also appears to be standing, looking at the child. Recommending abort experiment. Day 2. Time, 50 hours into experiment. Distance from target, unknown. Subject 2. Something appears to be standing behind the man we hired to act as a thing for our experiment. It is not our man. Subject 2 is trying to warn our man, but he isn't listening or reacting as we told him strictly not to. Subject 5. Neither our man nor anything but the child can be seen in the warehouse anymore. Subject 5 is now screaming, they lied. Control. Subject 3. The thing is now much closer to the child. It is moving at a faster pace than called for by the experiment. Child 3 is thrashing and appears to have bitten off his own tongue, possibly as an attempt at suicide. Subject 4. The child is now weeping and screaming as the thing stands but a few feet from him. It is not human. I am begging my superior to stop the experiment, but he insists it continue. Day 2. Time, 50 hours, 15 minutes into experiment. Distance from target, 0 feet. Subject 2. The thing has killed our man. It gutted him and spread his intestines around the floor of the warehouse, seemingly for no other reason than to scare the child, which it now stands over, peeling off its skin. Subject 5. Subject is hysterical, screaming and almost laughing, yelling, they lied! Still nothing can be seen in the warehouse. Control. Subject 3. The thing is now sitting in the chair. Its hand is through the back of the subject's skull, working the dead child like a puppet. Subject 4. The thing is dragging the child from the waist up back into the darkness, laughing. The child's legs remain in the chair. We have ordered an end to this experiment, but it is too late. This next piece could be found as a side note in one of the notebooks. As we turned on all the warehouse lights, gruesome scenes of mutilated bodies greeted us, but those things were nowhere to be found. Fortunately, Subject 5 had somehow survived the experiment. The thing gutted our man similarly to what had been done in Subject 2's warehouse, yet the child was left unharmed for some reason. The child, although alive, is near catatonic and apparently not able to do anything but yell, they lied. This is the last note found in what appears to be the experimental manager's lab book. It reads, Today I visited Subject 5 in the hospital. He had slipped into a coma shortly after the experiment ended, and has stayed that way for over a week now. I didn't know what I expected from my visit, but I had to let him know that I was sorry. Sorry for everything that happened. Sorry for prolonging the experiment. Sorry for subjecting him to one of those things. I approached his bed and sat on the chair next to it. Although I felt silly talking to a comatose child, I began to explain how the experimental plan never actually called for any harm to be done to the children, despite what they were told. I explained how it was meant to give us insight into... His eyes fluttered. I gasped and leaned in as he started to mumble something. Something all too familiar. They lied. They lied about what? I asked. Who lied? You did, he said as his eyes opened and looked directly into mine. What did I lie about? I asked, feeling uneasy. How far are you from the warehouse? He asked. The warehouse for the experiments? Those are on the other side of town, I said. That's a start, he chuckled. You really think that thing in Warehouse 5 just decided to leave me alone? You lied to me. You lied to me! You said it would come for me, when really, it never wanted me. It's coming for you. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far you go, it will eventually get you. What exactly was it that prompted you to leave where you were and come visit me, Doctor? Was it a feeling of guilt? Or was it a feeling that something was slowly, ever so slowly reaching your house? Never sleeping and never stopping. And when it finally gets you, and believe me, it will hurt you, torture you.